So, hello everyone, and welcome to our Module 2, Part 1. And for today's topic, we are going to discuss about the introduction to qualitative research and psychology. So this is based on Willig's book, Introduction to Qualitative Research in Psychology. So in this class, I'll be shifting from 3 books, so namely Creswell's book, Willig's book on Introduction to Qualitative Research, and as well as the Sage Handbook for Qualitative Research in Psychology by Willig and Stainton Rogers. So, without further ado, let's begin our lesson, and I hope that you will gain a lot more knowledge about how to do qualitative research through this class. So first is, of course, this is a review for us. What is epistemology? So, epistemology is how and what can we know about our research. So, this is a branch of philosophy concerned with the theory of knowledge. So where does knowledge come from? That's epistemology. And this is also talking about the nature of knowledge. What's the scope of knowledge? How valid it is? How reliable are claims to knowledge? And this epistemology is also what we called worldviews, okay? Or alternative knowledge claims and or paradigms. So this helps us identify what lens should we apply when we do our research. What theoretical lens should we apply? So for example, if you're a quantitative researcher, so you're gonna do more of the post-positivism or positivism side of the epistemology or worldview. So speaking of positivism, so this is also known as the correspondence theory of truth. So where there is a straightforward relationship between the world's objects, events, and phenomena and our perception and understanding. So it simply means that positivists believe that it is possible to describe what is out there and to get it right. So this is also known, like I said, as a correspondence theory because it suggests that phenomena directly determines our perception of them and that there is therefore a direct correspondence between things and their representation. So it simply means that what we perceive about the world or the world is equal to our perception, and objective reality is same as subjective reality, and the things that we perceive as is a representation of what we actually hear, see, feel, and taste. It is now generally accepted that the above is not true, or perception is partial at best. So it just simply means that nowadays it is believed that somehow there is still bias in our perception no matter how objective we seem to be are. So the question is the extent to which our understanding can approach objective knowledge or truth. So how far can we go to determine if what we have research about is the objective truth? So range of responses to this question from naive realism to extreme relativism, with critical realism and versions of social constructionism in the middle. So realism, okay, it means that everything that we hear, see, taste, these are akin to positivism, wherein there is really an objective truth. And of course, the extreme relativism, which means that there is no such thing as truth, because truth is subjective for each person. And next one is Hypothetico-Deductivism. So this is testing theories using data, and this was popularized by Karl Popper. And this is because of his critique of inductivism and subsequent formulation of hypodeductivism. So this is now the mainstream. It now forms the basis of mainstream's experimental psychology. Popper was aware of the fact that collection of observations could never give rise to categorical statements such as A follows B. However, many times we observe that A follows B, we can never be sure that our next observation will be the same again. There is a possibility that in the next occurrence, there will be an exception. This is the problem of induction. So, Popper was unhappy about the fact that many influential theories appeared to be able to accommodate a wide range of observations, interpreting them as a confirmation of the theory's claims. It seems that no scientific theory could ever be conclusively verified. And this is where he said there's a problem when it comes to verification. And for him, he proposed that instead of using induction and verification process, he relied upon deduction and falsification. So when we say induction, it means that it is coming from within. So in induction, we gather data first before we can come up with a theory. And he saw a problem with that, especially when it comes to the verification of theories. But he proposed a deduction and falsification method. So deduction now is when you gather data and then you have already a theory in mind, and so you try to test the falsification of the theory, okay, by refuting or agreeing with the theory. Here, theories are tested by deriving hypotheses from them that then can be tested in practice by experiment or observation. So the aim of the research is to put the theory's claims to the test to either reject the theory or retain it for the time being. So thus, rather than looking for evidence that confirms the theory's claim, the Hypothetico-Deductivism works by looking for disconfirmation or falsification. So in this way, we can find out which claims are not true, and by the process of elimination of claims, we move closer to the truth. So that's the problem with induction and verification method. So in induction and verification method, so he was unsatisfied because a lot of theories got accommodated because of the data. He seems that no scientific theory could ever be conclusively verified. So there is no way that we can really 100% confirm that a certain theory is true. It is only through the hypothetico-deductive method, or when we say that we build a hypothesis first and then use deductive reasoning to confirm or falsify a certain theory. So that's the only way we can get to the truth or to the causes of a certain behavior or phenomena that we are looking into. Okay, so now let's continue with social constructionism. So in social constructionism, for them, the truth is socially constructed, hence there are multiple truths. So for them, of course, human experience, including our own perception, is mediated historically, culturally, and linguistically. So social constructivism, that is, what we perceive and experience is never a direct reflection of the environmental conditions, but must be understood as a specific reading of these conditions. So it means that unlike positivism, where our objective reality is the same as our subjective reality, for social constructivism, we construct our own experiences based on the objective reality. This does not mean that we can never really know anything. Rather, it suggests that there are knowledges, meaning there are multiple truths, rather than a knowledge or a singular truth. So language is an important aspect of a socially constructed knowledge. The same phenomenon or event can be described in different ways, giving rise to different ways of perceiving and understanding it. Yet, neither way of describing it is necessarily wrong. So like in here, knowledge is socially constructed, Hence, there are knowledges or different truths. There are multiple truths rather than a singular. And each person has a different way of describing their experiences. So, your lived experiences may be different from my lived experiences because I construct my own reality. So, research from a social constructionist perspective is concerned with identifying with the various ways of constructing social reality that are available in a culture, to explore the conditions of their use, and to trace their implications for human experience and social practice. So, social constructionist researchers in psychology, for instance, have critically examined the psychological categories such as emotions, prejudice, and psychopathology to show how they provide a way of constructing reality rather than simply reflecting on it. Okay, so they are concerned on constructing a social reality. So it means that they are looking into how does a culture perceive a certain language or word, for example, like prejudice. What is prejudice in a culture? What's the difference from the American perception of prejudice versus the Filipino perception of prejudice? Something like that. So, what is the relationship between epistemology and the methodology? So, the methodology is on your chapter 3 of the research, right? So, what's the relationship between what our theoretical lens is or our epistemology to the methodology that we are going to apply here? So, what's the relationship between epistemology and methodology? To what extent does the epistemological position we adopt prescribe which research methods we ought to use? To address these questions, we first need to differentiate between method and methodology. So, although they are used interchangeably, the two terms do differ, in fact, refer to different aspects in doing research. So, according to Silverman, he suggests that methodology identifies the general approach in studying research topics. Meanwhile, method refers to a specific technique. Okay, so a further distinction then can be made between methods of data collection and methods of data analysis. So again, methodology is how do we do a certain research in general. So this includes what research approach you're gonna take, like is it quanti, quali, experimental, survey? Okay, so method on the other hand is the specific steps that you're gonna take. So for example, what is your data collection method? So either through a questionnaire, through a open-ended or semi-structured interview, or for method of data analysis. So are you gonna use Braun and Clark's method of thematic analysis, or will you use SPSS? Something like that. So, a methodology is directly informed by researchers' epistemological positions. Your epistemology determines what methodology you will use. And vice versa. So, if you have a qualitative methodology, so it means that your epistemology is, of course, that of the social constructivist worldview. So, for example, a researcher who takes predominantly empiricist view of knowledge acquisition will approach research topics through the collection of data rather than through theoretical formulations. However, exactly how such data are collected, like for example, observation, questionnaires, and interview is another question, and it is not something that the researcher's empiricist epistemological position prescribe. So, Hypothetico-Deductivism constitutes an exception here, since it offers a researcher both an epistemological position and a research method, namely hypothesis testing through experimentation. So, if, for example, you're a social constructivist, a social constructionist methodology is not compatible with methods that are designed to measure variables in population. This is because social constructivist or social constructionism problematize given constructs as such as psychological variables. It questions their validity and it is concerned with exploring the various ways in which they are made real. So this cannot be achieved through an attempt to measure such construct. Therefore, according to the social constructivist viewpoint, the measurement of psychological variables itself is one more way of making them real, of constructing them. So, in a quantitative research show, we try to measure, of course, the variables. So, it is more of hypothesis and then you are trying to prove or disprove a certain theory. That's the Hypothetico-Deductivism method. Okay? And meanwhile, in the social constructivist worldview, of course, your construct is being made real, meaning you are not measuring such construct because you don't have a certain definition of that construct or operational definition of that construct. Instead, in social constructivist worldview, you are trying to come up with a definition or making it real or constructing such phenomena or variable. So, in qualitative methods, there is a focus, of course, on meaning making. So, diverse qualitative research methods with different epistemological positions, shared concern in meaning or how people make sense of the world and how they experience events. Interested with the quality and texture of experience rather than identification of cause-effect relationships. So, they aim to understand what it is like to experience a particular condition, meaning, for example, what it means and how it feels to live with a chronic illness or to be unemployed, and how people manage certain situations. So, like, for example, how people negotiate family life or relations with work colleagues. So, qualitative researchers tend, therefore, to be concerned with the quality and texture of experiences. That's why in a qualitative methodology, there is, of course, the focus on meaning making. How do you make sense of your life today? That's why I also ask you from the very start, what is your research story? Or what is your psychology story as a student? So how do you find meaning in what you do? How do you make sense with the challenges in life? So that's what qualitative methodology is. There is a focus on finding meaning rather than looking into the cause and effect relationship. So we cannot say that your study habits will affect your grades. We cannot do such relationship. We are just interested into finding meaning or looking into the experiences of certain people. And of course, there is the turn to interpretation. So, since in qualitative methodologies, we are interested in finding meaning, there is also, of course, interest in turning into interpretation. So, is where the interest in meaning is attributed to events by participants and researchers. Okay? And there is an interest in the interpretation of these meanings by the participants. And often wishes to describe the and explain the phenomena but never to predict. Again, there is also a turn to interpretation. How does the participant interpret the phenomenon, but as well as the researcher? How does he or she interpret the event that happened to the participant's life? So, like, for example, in my case, in my research about narrative, so there is a section there that where the participants tells his or her story, and then there's a section also where I retell the story. So that is how finding meaning and interpretation work. And of course, the goal of the qualitative methodology is to have a thick description and explain that phenomenon. So like in my case, I would like to show a thick description of their narratives. What is their story from beginning to the end? So what is the story of those CICL participants that I have gathered? So what is their story before, during, and after their experience? But of course, this is not to predict that, for example, after they cut out, they will become successful, or what are the factors that would make them not go back to the center again. Okay, so that is not the goal of qualitative methodology. Okay, so of course, qualitative researchers study people in their own territory within naturally occurring settings. So like in homes, schools, hospital, the streets, and these are open systems where conditions continuously develop and interact with one another to give rise a process of ongoing change. And that is why prediction of outcomes is not meaningful goal for qualitative researchers. Instead, they ask questions about processes, such as what do people do when they form groups? How do people manage change in the workplace? Or how do people live with chronic pain? So it's not all about prediction, but all about process, knowing the process. So that's why if you have research question that says about what are the factors when it comes to studying, that is not a qualitative approach. So the better question is, how do students study? Okay? What is the process of studying? Or what is their study habit? So that is some of the qualitative questions that you can derive from that quantitative question that I gave earlier. So of course, the last goal of qualitative research method is of course theory generation. So qualitative methodologies are open-ended inductive research concerned with theory generation and exploration of meaning. So of course, the goal really here of qualitative methodology is to form a theory because we are using the inductive method wherein we gather data and we don't have any theory in mind. And after we have gathered the data and analyzed it, we then conceptualize a theory that would explain that phenomenon. So that's why the output when it comes to your qualitative method, one of the output there is you're supposed to have a thematic map, which will serve as a conceptual framework of your thesis. So that's why in quantitative research, there is a theoretical framework and a conceptual framework before you gather your data or before you go to the methodology. But in qualitative research, the framework comes after when you finish analyze the results. So qualitative epistemology, so this is interpretation using a theory or lens. Theory determines the interpretation of data. So what you see depends on what lens you are using. So like I said, when you do quantitative research, you have the post-positivism lens. Okay? But if you're doing qualitative research, you have the social constructivist lens. And the interpretation of data depends upon the theoretical framework informed by our epistemological stance. So how do we interpret our data depends, of course, on what theoretical lens we use. So that's why when we do post-positivism, the interpretation of data there is more of numerical rather than textual. And in qualitative, it's more of textual rather than numerical. So that's it. That's the first part for Into to Quali. So next is, of course, I will now introduce the different qualitative research approaches. And for this one, just read the chapter from Willig's book that is about from recipes to adventure. So read that chapter on it because, of course, that is part of our lecture session. So now let's proceed to, of course, what are the qualitative research methodologies, and this will serve as our and this will serve as your intro to the different qualitative methods, in which next week or in the third week of our session you will present them. Okay, so that's your assignment, that's your presentation, your lab activity number 3, which is presentation of the different methods. But of course, like I said, this is just to introduce you to the different qualitative methods that we can use. And of course, there are a lot of qualitative methods, but what I will just train you is to use, of course, the phenomenological approach. That's the first one. That's the first thing that I want you to learn rather than go to more advanced ones such as narrative or grounded. These are all for grad school. So I hope you won't get intimidated in doing research because I'm trying to help you to do your research in such a way that you can finish it on time as well as you have an idea of how to do this. That's the most important part, the skills in doing your research, qualitative research. Okay? So let's now go to the qualitative research. So this is based on Willig and Stainton's book on Sage Handbook in Qualitative Research in Psychology. So you read those chapters regarding the different methods. So that will be also the basis for your report. Okay? So the overview of methodology. So of course there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9. Okay, there are 9 overview of methodology, but of course out of the 9 we will just or you will just tackle 8, I guess. So under the different qualitative methodology are ethnography, conversation analysis, discursive psychology, Foucauldian discourse analysis, memory work, narrative psychology, phenomenological psychology, interpretative phenomenological analysis, and grounded theory. So there's also, besides that, there are a lot. So besides the 9 or 8 that you will discuss, there are also action research, psychoanalytic approaches to psychology, social representations, and Q methodologies. But this part, we won't discuss this in class. We will just discuss the basic or most commonly used qualitative research methods. So what now is ethnography? So ethnography is a form of observation. It is a process in which the researcher anticipates okay. So ethnography. So ethnography is a form of observation, and this is the process in which the researcher participates in people's everyday lives for a sustained period. It aims to understand the cultural and symbolic aspects of people's action, and usually focuses on a specific group of people or a case involving culturally significant practices. So ethnography, this is common usually in anthropology course, anthropologists. So they look into the society as a whole, and it also looks into different ethnic groups. They try to look into how do they perceive their lives, what is the process of their everyday life, okay? And usually it involves you immersing really to the group, immersing to that group that you are studying. So it's really long. Sometimes it involves a year or 2 years in order for you to understand and observe them. So maybe in the future you might have an interest in that. But I guess the best example that I could give to you is your project in Filipino psychology, wherein you immerse in a certain group and then you try to observe what they were doing. Okay. So, but that is just the mini version of a certain ethnography methodology. So, conversation analysis. So, this is the study of talk in interaction. So, it is interdisciplinary approach to understanding social life. It assumes that talk is a form of action, and talk is structurally organized, and talk creates intersubjectivity. So it looks at how people do or produce social order, and it also uses naturalistic data, ordinary conversation, institutional talk, or both. So this is looking into, of course, the conversations of people, looking into how do they interact with each other, what are the how do they do social order, like who is the dominant speaker versus those who is also just a receiver. And of course, it also uses naturalistic data like the ordinary conversation. So it might be that you want to have a conversation analysis of your group meeting. So someone will observe your group meeting and then they will try to record and analyze your conversations there. And it could be also institutional talk. So maybe a speech of a president, you can study that on how does the president interact with his or her speech. Next is, of course, discursive psychology. So the central topic is discourse, the talk and text as part of the practice. So it recognizes the primacy of social or relational nature of life. It focuses on what people do in settings that they live their lives in their everyday and institutional situations. And of course, the materials for study are recordings of people in particular locations. So conversation analysis and discursive psychology is it's almost the same. But of course, the focus on discursive is, of course, the discourse, the talk and text. Okay? And look into, of course, the relationship, social relationship of life. So, another kind of discourse psychology is the Foucauldian discourse analysis. So, discourse is a set of statements that constructs object in an array of subject positions. It explores the role of discourse in subjectivity and selfhood. It links discourses to power, to institutions, and social practices. So it asks, how does discourse construct subjects and objects? So usually FDA, you will do that in grad school. So this is advanced qualitative methods, but of course, what like I said, the basic ones that I will let you do is, of course, phenomenological research. So memory work is collective analysis of experience. It examines the social production of experience. It looks at process of appropriation, meaning the relationship within the object, social structures, and subjective experience. And a group of people write their memories and analyze their memories for a period of time. So I think this is related also to psychoanalytic methods in memory work, especially in therapy. So this one is more on people analyzing what they have remember or what do they remember, because in here they look into how does a person remember something. Okay? So it looks into what you remember happened versus what truly happened. So narrative psychology, so this is my master's thesis. So it argues that narratives pervades everyday life. It concerned with how humans make sense of the world through narratives or stories and organize interpretations of a sequence of events. It can look into the biographical or topic-focused narrative interviews, And narratives are analyzed in terms of structure and content. So it looks into how do they tell their stories about their life. Okay? And they are analyzed, of course, their structure. So before, during, after, and of course, the content. So what are the themes inside those stories? And of course, phenomenological research or phenomenological psychology. So it aims to capture as closely as possible the way in which the phenomenon is experienced within the context which the experience takes place. So it the analysis attempts to discern the psychological essence of the phenomenon. So what does this experience mean to you? Okay? It derives the psychological meaning or sense of people's descriptions of their lived experiences. So, like for example, what is the lived experiences of trans women versus biological women? So, of course, there are certain differences there. So, it aims to look exactly what the phenomenon is. And it's usually at the end, you are going to like show a process, a process in which the how the experience takes place. So of course, there's also another kind of phenomenological analysis, but it has interpretation involved. So interpretative phenomenological analysis. So this is or it aims to explore in detail how participants make sense of their world. It involves detailed examination of the participants' lived experiences and subjectivity. So it has double hermeneutic, meaning a two-stage interpretation process. So it has the how does the participant make sense of their world, and another is how does the researcher make sense of the participants' experiences. So that's IPA is a little bit complicated compared to the simple phenomenological research, but of course, since we are just beginners, you are just going to do the phenomenological research. So next is of course grounded theory. It is a flexible set of inductive strategies for building theories grounded from data. So grounded theory focuses on theory creation based on your data. So that's why it's grounded on data. It starts inductively with cases or focused data. So the researcher creates categories and makes theoretical abstract sense of the data. It gathers specific data to refine categories and theoretical explanations. And it is a set of systematic guidelines for gathering and analyzing data to construct a theory. So the goal of grounded theory is of course to for you to be able to create a theory. Okay? So grounded theory is usually done or usually discussed more in your PhD when you do to your PhD. So that's why, like I said, this is just an overview of the different qualitative approaches that we can do in psychology. So I think that's it for now. So again, the source here is Sage Handbook of Qualitative Research in Psychology by Willig and Stainton Rogers. So in the next part, so in our module 3 and module 4, we are now going to discuss the different qualitative research methods, and that will be presented by you class during our lab period. Okay, so thank you everyone for listening to this recorded session, and I hope that I will again see you soon in the laboratory for our workshops, and that's all. Bye bye. Bye bye.